Hello, and welcome to Supply Chain Next. I'm your host, Richard Donaldson. Join me as we explore the ongoing evolution of supply chain, from the challenges practitioners face every day to the ongoing digital transformation of the entire value network. Welcome to the next episode of Supply Chain Next, and I'm super pumped to wind up the year with now friend and colleague David Crawley from the University of Houston. Hey, David.
Hey, Richard.
Going to dive right in, Dave, and we chatted last week, as I do with a lot of people, and I'm just going to start off right off the bat. You've got such an interesting background in history and just stories, and I just want to start with just an introduction in your own words of who you are and kind of what you're doing, and then I'm really going to get into kind of where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be of service to you and your audience. I can describe myself as in one sentence, right? So I'm a man of purpose and compassion who believes in the integrity of great work. Yeah. And my purpose is that I'm a catalyst for something greater than today.
Okay. That's awesome. I love that. Short, succinct, and pithy, as we might call that. Concise and economy of language. But now, I'm going to say, though, that type of insight and clarity didn't happen just this morning. That came through years of development experiences, and you didn't have a traditional path to where you are today, or maybe it's just a unique path. So I'd love to walk all the way back to kind of how you got into sort of this consumer marketing branding, how you ended up in Moscow of all places. Let's talk about that for a little bit, because you were all over the place. Yeah,
I've been fortunate to stumble forward throughout my life conventionally, and I think in many instances, I've been blessed beyond my imagination. Mm-hmm. It originates from the beginnings of my life, really, in my perspective. I was homeless as a teenager, broken home, that kind of thing. Realized that the only way I was going to prosper and my way out of the situations of my life was to get a degree. Mm-hmm. And during that time, they didn't have a lot of computerized oversight to everything. And so I was able to go to the University of Kansas by walking up to the admissions, paying my fee, and getting my student ID and picking up my classes, and I was in. Wow. And then I just grinded it through, right? I worked my way through. I lived in an abandoned house for several years in a porch room with the vision of what I wanted to be, the kind of person I wanted to be, or certainly the kind of career, which at that stage was to become an international advertising and marketing executive. I'm dyslexic. I'm ADHD. That was undiagnosed at the time, so I really didn't start discovering that until much later.
And this was roughly, Dave, sorry to interrupt, but this was roughly kind of 70s time frame?
It was the 70s, so you can imagine, I had hair down to my shoulders. I'm not entirely proud of it, but I, as a stoner to figure out.
It was a different era, man. It was the 70s and the 60s and long hair and free love. And
yeah, it was crazy, and it was a great way for me to escape my situation of having to grind it out by living on $125 a month. Mm. I was fortunate that the abandoned house I was living in didn't charge me rent for a year and a half. So, things like that. But, and I graduated with $150 in my pocket, and I bought a one-way ticket to Dallas, and I ended up sleeping on a friend's couch until he got tired of me. This was really difficult to date girls on his part and have me there in the living room, right? So anyway, fast forward, I always wanted to get involved in advertising because I love the dynamics of creativity. I love the aspect how creativity can be deployed as a purpose,
right,
with the intent to motivate people to action,
right.
And every situation that you engage in with your clients in advertising is something new that hasn't been done before.
Right.
And since building my life from living in a basement of people who owned a house I didn't know, taking a shower underneath the hose, everything in my life was created moving forward. Not necessarily in the best manner. There's many situations I would certainly change, but right, a life without regret is like a library of unread books. So,
well, can I jump in for a second, Dave? And I apologize, because I think it's so fascinating. But I hear there's a connection. I don't know if you've thought about this, between your pursuit of marketing and, as you describe it, the ability to sort of catalyze change through maybe thought and action or words, or however you kind of view that. But there's an interest. I mean, I just immediately kind of sense there's something about that choice, of all things, given your background and what you came out of, right? Versus, say, finance or, I don't know, sales, I guess, marketing kind of a way, but
right.
Supply chain for that matter. But I mean, there's something about that marketing choice that seems kind of. Yeah,
it was. I really liked the idea of PR, but I couldn't write.
Okay.
I was a horrible writer.
Right.
But then, I make my life writing now.
Right.
I figured it out. Actually, my mentor figured it out for me and drugged me through it, kicking and screaming, with the enthusiasm to learn at the same time. So I clawed my way into the advertising agency industry because I just wouldn't give up.
Yep.
If I gave up, then I'd prove everybody right who told me I wasn't good enough. And I got that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I found a great mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the everything I wanted to be. He was sophisticated. He had phenomenal command of language. He was a sense that he could sit there and talk to the CEO or an ambassador and yet have a different conversation with the guy in the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was a phenomenal presenter, and he took this kid and he had me about 4 months in. He looked at me, and I didn't graduate till I was 26.
Mm-hmm.
So at the age of 28, he looked at me and he said, it's phenomenal. I've never known anybody with such passion to succeed. But your skill sets is where somebody at the age of 22, 23 is.
Mm-hmm.
And so normally I'd fire you. But because of this passion, I will teach you everything I know, because I needed somebody to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, on one condition, that you will do everything I tell you to do, no matter how hard it is for you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you will promise that you will teach other people what I'm teaching you and what you will learn. And you will teach it to others unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And for the next 4 years, it was nuts. I mean, I had to go to night school to learn grammar all over again at
Mm-hmm.
the library. He gave me tickets to the opera, and I'd have to come back and give a presentation for 15 minutes about, who I sat next to, what we did, what the play was about, who I met in the, he would take me to lunch, and I would have to create stories for everybody that was in the lunch, what they were talking about, who was in control, who, all these things. Phenomenal. The depth. He'd have me come up with a word a day and use it 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
He did that for a year and a half to force me to increase my vocabulary. And And after 4.5, almost 5 years, I moved on into larger advertising agencies. I just kept focusing on the things that I was taught in the fundamentals, but understanding that everything is new in your engagement. And I wrote my own proposals. I wrote my own ads if needed. Although these were very large ad agencies, and I worked with Pepsi, and I was in the field.
Right.
So being in the field, you saw the granular activities of the movement of the product on the shelf.
Right.
And you would develop programs with that specific intent. So it was very granular in that engagement and merchandising media to provoke distribution of goods, through these channels. And there were many different channels that Pepsi's involved in. People think Pepsi's in the job of selling soft drinks, and they're not. The job of selling syrup. And the bottlers are in the job of selling soft drinks to distributors, not to the end consumer. But they build with the pull strategy accordingly. And so all of the ecosystem of that had to be managed and had to be touched on and had to have a certain degree of logic modeling, where all parts are seamlessly connected. And I saw that from the field. And, I get in my car and I drive to a grocery store, look around. I drive to a theme park, drive to a restaurant, all these different venues, even the vending machines and where they were placed, they competed. And then we would compete in schools. And many times we would go to schools to just bid against Coca-Cola to push Coca-Cola to spend more money for that contract than they had intended, which then gave us money to spend on the schools that we really wanted to get into. We burned up Coke's budget and things like that. And so you do really great work on little things, or perform, and you're given opportunities to do bigger things. And so that was one of the dynamics that I was taught, and I just kept deploying it. I probably put in 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, just right. But you do. And one of the things that was evident during that time is that you can taste great work. It tastes like metal.
Right.
Because you have to work twice as hard for that last mile of the development of your idea. Because, advertising is all about ideas and the execution thereof. And you can get something done that's good enough, but nobody really pays money for good enough with the value of what it is. And opportunities generally don't come to those that just do good enough things.
Right.
So you put in that, that extra bit because it's what where you want to go, where you're at. And so eventually that led to me being, I came to Houston. I maintained my relationship with Pepsi, and I developed programs in sports marketing, cross-referencing with Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and the other properties of PepsiCo and Frito-Lay in particular. And, blending these dynamics. When you're doing a program with multiple entities, those are like different degrees of an equation, three dimension, 4-dimension, because you have to blend all their requirements, the things that they want, the agenda they want. And if you're able to do that, it's like plywood, right? You have to have a cause and a purpose. And then each one of those pieces of the plywood have grains that go in different directions, but they're unified.
Right.
You build these programs not with any one organization overshadowing the other, but the strength of all this coming together benefits everybody anyway by circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
That was a key discovery of building these programs. And at some point, I was had the opportunity from people from Mexico asked me to develop promotional marketing programs for northern Mexico out of Monterrey. And co-managed the manufacture of Mirinda soft drink, which was the number 2 soft drink of PepsiCo at the time, for import into the Valley here in Texas. And then package design in Cyprus, the island, and then developed competitive adversarial marketing programs against the organized distributors in Italy. That any way you want. And then I co-wrote the business plan for introducing product in Austria. And then they asked me to go to Russia to launch Frito-Lay, which I did. And it was kind of an interesting call. I get this call and they said, would you be willing to come to Moscow? And I said, yeah, I love it.
And just to put it in context again, when you were asked to go to Moscow, this is right in the sort of mid to late 90s. And 2
years after the attempted coup d'etat.
There we go. So right. So there was quite a bit of uncertainty going to Moscow at that time, and fractionalization, and just the geopolitical environment was to me
that was normal.
Oh, okay.
I mean, let's face it.
Right.
When you live an unconventional childhood,
yes,
and vestiges of a misspent youth,
right?
That's just the way it is.
Well, for you it is, though, but for people listening, and I bet even your students, right, you got to kind of put a historical context here, which is, I was in Czechoslovakia right when the Velvet Revolution happened, right?
Right.
And, watching Václav Havel come to power at that time, and then also the I'll call it the disintegration of the Cold War wall, right? The Iron Curtain, and seeing that firsthand, it's hard to explain to people today what that was like and what the people were kind of going through. And, again, I got to point out here in the mid 90s, you were asked to go to Moscow at a time right when the Cold War was kind of on its backside, let's call it. Russia was almost in a retreating mode. This is right in the moment when, how we know him now, Putin was just kind of coming out of this chaos, right, to emerge as the victor amongst all those folks. Yeah.
Putin at the time was mayor of St. Petersburg. Yeltsin was the president who stopped the coup d'etat.
Right.
And is the Cold War ever really over?
Well, right.
That's a debate we can have. It was the Wild West. Kidnapping, death threats, that kind of stuff is always entertaining, but that's just the way it is there. Negotiating tactics, right? But they gave me the offer. I took it. Because, when opportunity knocks and the door is open, you really don't have a long time to ruminate on it. You either are prepared for it, or you're committed to be prepared for it, and you step through it.
Yep.
You step into the unknown.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then you work it out. And so I went home that night and I said, honey, we were just married. We'd been married for a while, and we had a 1-year-old son. And I said, "Honey, I decided to go work for PepsiCo." And she said, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to launch Frito-Lay in Russia." She said, "That's fantastic. When are you going to do that?" And I said, "On Friday, which is a day and a half from today." That didn't go over well. That didn't go well at all. But right, they wired me buy clothes because it was 30 degrees below zero or 20 degrees below zero, and living in Houston, right? I didn't have that kind of winter clothes, and I moved to Moscow, and my we would, my wife's British, so she would periodically go and visit her mother with our son, and I'd come back. But it was really tough on everybody. And then I became deputy CEO of Y&R, world's largest advertising agency, deputy CEO of the Moscow operations, Moscow CIS, 12 time zones at the time. I had developed an expertise in creating markets, creating a market, or capitalizing, rather recognizing an emerging market and capitalizing on it. So I developed an expertise in that, which is, once again, right, relate that back to a kid that was living in a 10 by 13 room in an abandoned house, wondering what his future was going to be. So I just took that in, the instincts of that, and built on it, and I was working there. And then my wife told me that I was nuts because they wanted me to open up offices in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan. And she just said, "You're nuts. You have a choice to make." So I quit that and came back home and rebooted my life. And in the process, I got involved in startups. Then became a subject matter expert in population-based computing and traveled the world with Hewlett-Packard, helping to develop markets and building business models or business solutions, which you could call it the cloud today, and shareware and things of that nature. And a big part of that activity involved the distribution of information across the value chain of processes and operations. As there's a unity in the operational flow that has to sync up. And so the value chain dynamic is relatively the same, with various nuances, mind you, but per geo. But those nuances are traditionally unique to the culture as opposed to the fundamentals. Everything should have a sense of, okay, these are the fundamentals, but what are the influencing factors? And so then my son has learning disabilities, and so my wife and I decided that we homeschool our son. He has some significant disabilities, but he has an IQ of 146. So I quit everything. I kind of worked out of the house. I worked with some people I knew who started an intelligence company, security intelligence firm, founded by Jim Bernazzani, former deputy director of the CIA for law enforcement and retired special agent in charge of New Orleans, and all these guys. And so I was the analyst. Corporate intelligence, related back to how PepsiCo competed with everybody, and creating market, right? You always had to understand the players, right? It's not always what you know; it's what they know. And so so I did that, and I decided to get my an advanced degree, and I went to the Conrad Hilton College at the University of Houston and spoke to the associate dean, Dr. Boger, and he used to work for Taco Bell. I didn't know it at the time, and halfway into my discussion with him, he said, "I know who you are. I know what you did, and why don't you just start teaching?" And because there's a certain activity in these large corporations where you don't earn your way into it, invited. And so he knew what it meant to go to Russia, or any market, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I created a class. It was innovation and unconventional marketing.
Interesting. Okay.
And so it was a graduate level course and a bachelor level course. It was a mix, and I brought all the all the systems that I'd learned from Kraft Jacobs Sucard to Young and Rubin to other advertising agencies or corporations on how they use systems thinking to develop clarity and purpose for whatever the programs they were initiating, whether it be in communications for an ad or whether it be an initiative to open up a distribution channel. They had a process, and there were different processes. And then I had created my own as well. I'd invented a brain creation process, dragged through it by my client, Lazure, out of Paris, because they said all the functionality of a brand is nice, it's intellectually stimulating, but where's the soul?
Right.
And so I had, they gave me 2 weeks to develop a plan or a process that would deliver the soul of a brand, which I did. The account, which was multi-million dollars. You're basically selling ideas for millions of dollars.
Right.
Right. You sell a logo for $150,000, not $50. And, so anyway, built the class on that. And then an assistant provost introduced me to the dean of the technology college. He knew there. And I shared with him the evolution of innovation. Innovation has taken on the aspects of an emerging market. It's developing leadership. When you start seeing associations developing around a particular topic, that pushes a degree of awareness and unity into the subject that evolves as an actual marketplace. And then people start writing articles and things of that nature. And then then people start competing. And then when other companies start competing, then they're actually creating the market. The consumer wants it or not. Over time, it could evolve and disappear, but generally not. Certainly if the relevance is there. And innovation as a market was demonstrating principles that was consistent with an industry.
Okay.
And so with that, I shared with him where it was going, what I thought it would be. There's foresight in all this, because whenever you're developing something that's not here today, right? You're using foresight to develop a sense of cognitive fluidity. Things are always changing, and you have to evaluate things on the way they are changing, not by what you know. Right? There's cognitive crystallization is about things that you know, and do you apply it? And that has to be the basis. But the fluidity part is, can you engage something new and understand it as being new?
So let me jump in on that one, Dave, because I'm gonna you've segued brilliantly into the sort of cross section of, I'm going to say, your marketing background, which I'm going to encapsulate is the desire to affect change within groups or people or systems or whatever.
Exactly.
And then that desire to catalyze change began to interweave itself with the concept of innovation, which by definition is change into perpetuity.
Exactly.
And therefore, you have to begin to realize that humanity has proven to resist change. as an individual or as a cell or as an organism, hell yeah, I can spontaneously change. I mean, that's evolution. But as a group, I think we've done a really awful job of innovating.
Right. And it's going to be like that for a while.
Right.
And it's human nature of survival.
Yeah.
You know, we engage with things with a sense of what we control. And what we control is to engage in a way of what we know. It's a process. And
which is an odd contradiction. And that's the kind of thing and this is why I jumped in on this, is because I hadn't thought about it until you started going through this, but innovation and marketing, or really innovation at the end of the day, is not necessarily about technology so much as it is about a way of thinking, about a way of approaching things.
Absolutely.
It's technology is just one piece of the puzzle, or it's a means to, it's one of the things, but innovation can be even what we're discussing now, how to think, how to behave.
Well, right. And so with the dean, right, at the college, we created 3 degrees around this approach.
Mm-hmm.
We have a minor degree, which is about applied innovation, which is about the skills of thinking, disciplines. Then we have technology leadership and innovation management, which is a baccalaureate degree that, trains people into managing technology and technology teams and solutions and orientation. Then there's a master's level, which is engineering, technology, innovation, and management. And these are the cornerstone of these curriculums is a program called Innovation Engineering. And it's been around for 35 years. Doug Hall, who's an absolute genius, originated this. About 12 years ago, I guess, 12, 13, the University of Maine collaborated with Doug, and they created this industry certification that's recognized accordingly as similar to Six Sigma. So all students who engage in the fundamentals course, which is the introductory course, have the opportunity to earn a blue belt in innovation engineering. And what we do in this program is we take that foundation, which is solid, that is focused on the skills of thinking, in a manner that we take the dynamics of the disciplines that I've learned throughout my career, and we blend those. So that we really bring people forward, not to create a business. Innovation is not entrepreneurism. Entrepreneurism is entrepreneurism, right? Starting a business. And it's not brainstorming, right? Brainstorming is only a piece of the chain of innovation. And it's not design thinking. It's design thinking is a piece of innovation, but it's, the give all, right? Because in a big part, design thinking is linear. It's a discussion of the problem or the user, and then to develop a solution for that particular situation. That's part of innovation. But the disciplines of thinking is completely unique in that it uses design thinking as a discipline, or it uses mind mapping as a discipline, because it's all about stimulating your brain. How do you stimulate your brain in a manner that you can mash other ideas together? See, innovation is an association of other ideas. So if you look at innovation, you have to be able to define it in a succinct, clear way. And we see innovation as the development and productization of something that is meaningfully unique. It's got to be meaningful to somebody, preferably to the person creating it, but it certainly has to be meaningful. But then it's got to be unique. Now, unique doesn't mean new to the world. That's great if it is, but it can be unique to the situation within which the innovator is engaged.
And I get this, and there's a question I'm going to get to here in a second, which is, people kind of reflexively, given the environment that we are in, the internet revolution that's still, let's be honest, it's still 30 years in, we're relatively new, the information age is still kind of, we're just innovating even how we think, going from the industrial age to the internet age or information age or whatever you want to call it. But innovation, to your point, people kind of today just sort of think, oh, well, it's got to be technology or it's got to be Silicon Valley or whatever. However, innovation really, at the end of the day, from what I'm hearing you say, can easily be applied to things like do we need a new concept around currency, for example, right? Like the entire predication of this basket of goods and a fiat-based currency, for God's sakes, is that really the best method with which we can do exchange amongst our species? Or hell, I'll even throw it out there today, right now, and I'll put it, and I'm not even going one way or the other, but politically, are we at a point where we need to reevaluate our system, right? And I'm not suggesting there's a right way to do it, but this is part of the innovative thinking to say, is a democracy as we know it the right best solution, or is there something looking forward 50 and 100 years that as we have a multiplanetary kind of system starting to develop as humanity starts to expand, what do we, and technology allows us to actually get to everybody. Is there a different way or system of kind of governing even, right?
Well, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Should always be sensitive. The dynamics of where the world is going is something that we've never experienced before. And we're bumping up against what's called future shock.
Right. I remember the book.
Yeah. And
Alvin Toffler or whatever, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And we experienced that in the 60s.
Yeah.
And we're stumbling all over 4.0.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we really are. And the World Economic Forum pointed out that the number one concern of businesses is the lack of innovation skills. And in the GE Innovation Barometer research, they pointed out that executives around the world said their biggest impediment to competitive ability is the lack of innovation skills in the workforce.
And I'm sorry, let me be real clear. When you say that, innovation skills, what specifically does that mean? What is the
problem solving and leadership?
Okay, got
it. And because we're addressing the issues that we've always known,
right?
And so if you take that dynamic, and also in the energy industry, it's reported around that there's 28% skills gap in innovation. In Europe, it's around 32, 34. And then you have roughly 28% of the workforce is going to retire in the next 5 years, just for Industry 5.0. Mm-hmm. And you have the dynamic aspect of workforce skills degrade by 50% over 6 years if they're not currently and constantly in engagement. And so if you have this setup where you have a lack of innovation skills, the disciplines of thinking, which is cognitive, flexibility, to embrace failure, fail fast, fail cheap, to engage the unknown, logic modeling, critical thinking, systems thinking, these dynamics. And so if you have that dearth moving today, and you have the erosion of skills, and it's new, right? So people know how to teach innovation, right? Other than leadership classes, entrepreneur classes, things like that. But that's not the disciplines of thinking. Philosophy is. People take philosophy.
Well, so hold on. I'm not going to let you go over that one too quickly, because again, this is where I think things get lost in people not really understanding the term innovation. I mean, in a way, for me, what I'm picking up on as innovation is almost more akin to philosophy in its mindsets and its thinking, right? Because it's not just, people are like, oh, I need to have innovation in my business. Well, what does that really mean? And quite frankly, at the end of the day, what I'm hearing, or at least I always think about it, hear from you quite loud and clear here, is it's not like innovation is just like, finance, where I'm going to bring someone in, they're going to know accounting through and through. Innovation is actually more of someone, in a way, is kind of like a philosopher who's just thinking differently about the system, who's asking questions like, why? I think, therefore I am. I mean, it's really, there's a really profound gap between what the world thinks innovation is and what you're describing, right?
Yeah, it's not inventing.
Yeah, right.
Outcome.
Right.
An entrepreneurial new business is an outcome.
Yep.
Storming or those types of techniques, those are disciplines of deployment.
Interesting. So Ben Franklin could be considered he was both, but I'm going to just say, for the lack of a better term right now, Ben Franklin can look at him and all that he invented as an inventor, not necessarily an innovator. But
he had to have innovative capabilities.
Yes.
With what he discovered. Because if you look at a lot of the things he did, it was the mashing of other ideas.
Yes, totally.
Developed a really cool aspect of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And you find that back in ancient China in the 1200 or 1000 BC, that they did a certain thing, and you reapply and repurpose that to today. Mm-hmm. That's innovation.
Yep.
How do your biggest impediment to being innovative is fear. Mm-hmm. Fear wrong, fear that I don't know, fear that somebody's going to make fun of me, whatever. And it's the unknown. The energy industry and supply chain to some degree operates on scale.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to ripple that thing all the way down the line. And it's going to not just, $100,000 for the mistake, but when it rolls out downstream, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's some resiliency to change. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
And so, but the evolution is this: everything is in a constant state of decay.
Right.
Our world, we're a physical world. Our universe is in a constant state of decay.
Entropy, man.
In a flow of cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
And so managing everything the way you do today doesn't apply itself to the evolution of advancing and the decay that's currently going on all the time. Cause and effect everywhere. So, you have to engage in the reality of those changes and be able to associate those to the values and the things that you're doing. And the way you do that is you stimulate your mind. And there's techniques. You can actually search patents, Google the name of your idea, and patents will come up, and there'll be 60% of patents are expired.
Mm-hmm.
But so you could pull your data from there, and you actually have a template to write a patent. We teach how to write patents in our class.
Mm-hmm.
It's teamwork. How do you inspire? How do you communicate in a manner that your idea can inspire people to give you access to resources? Too many people are so committed to the end result that they overlook the constellation of small decisions and steps that are taken to get there.
Mm-hmm.
In class, we don't have a midterm, we don't have a final, we don't have a 1,000-word paper, we don't have extra credit. We have templates that guide the students through systems thinking and logic modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what philosophy is. It's logic modeling.
Right.
It's pulling things into a consensus, like a value chain.
Mm-hmm.
all have to sync up and make sense, and they have to be balanced. This is somewhat like a supply chain. And so, when there's disharmony, when there's disruption, that balance begins to become awkward, and you have to go in and engage. And you engage with your mind. You change the world first with your mind. And so we teach these disciplines of thinking, and we teach the challenges of engaging your plan or your idea with the understanding that you don't just plan to the end result. You engage the value chain of concept to productization by the death threats that you will encounter. So hold
on. And again, I'm going to jump in here because there's so much to unpack in this, Dave. I mean, it should be, well, you teach a course on this. I mean, there's a course that should be taught on this, for God's sakes. But what I'm saying is, I would venture at this point, when you get someone undergraduate or graduate, let's just put it in a time frame. Again, they're coming out of high school, maybe they're a couple years into undergraduate, or maybe they're in a graduate program, so they're kind of in their early to mid 20s. In a way, this course, if they enter into it, one of the things I'm hearing that needs to be done is you almost need to deconstruct a lot of the frameworks that you've been conditioned within to start to allow yourself the elasticity of thinking required for innovation.
And you hit it right there. I mean, I've seen hardened professionals just break down in the program. And as flexible as my career had been, it was, a real challenge for me. And I still learn.
Oh, yeah, of course. Lifelong.
With this. Yeah, because it's fluid. But here's the problem with most people. Actually, everybody in America and in the Western world has encountered this. You, me, everybody. And this is what you have to overcome. Your mom handed you things in your right hand. I mean, for those that are left-handed, I appreciate your grace in this dialogue. But she handed you things in your right hand. In some countries, they'll even tape the left hand so that the child can't grab anything with it, even if they're left-handed. And so then at some point, you start handing things back to your mom in your right. And then you're communicating, right? That's a communication. You're an amoeba. You're just like barely 1 year old. So your only issue is survival. And then your mom points to something. That's the dog, chair, dad, mom, right? And then the baby starts learning to point to things that it wants, and it gets rewarded for that. It's all with the right hand. And then at some point, they learn words. And then words starts giving construct to cognitive thought. Right? I mean, the book on Helen Keller was amazing, right?
Totally,
she was a mess until she learned how to sign language water. And then like her mind just exploded. But so imagine a child. It's just, they can write a book about it. So then they managed to parse words together into a sentence. That's a pattern.
Right.
And at which point, the ability to survive for the child is dependent on the management of its environment and the ability to communicate. And the ego, which is self-awareness, slides over to the left side of the brain and becomes dominant. It can control. And so then the education system relies upon that dominance to teach memorization. And to always be reliant on what you know and if it's not part of that, then you're losing control. You're losing this thing, which is part of that fear aspect. Whereas unique solutions evolve, like leap, where like is the game, and that's what you want. When you're creating an emerging market or you're competing, you're looking for that something that's going to change the rules. As Rose said, the only way to compete is to change the rules on the competition.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes from the right side of your brain, which is chaos, but it's holistic. It's heuristic, but it sees things in the totality. Mm-hmm. So the challenge for our students and professionals is the ability to let go of the rigidity of what the memorization, the control of patterns, right? Mm-hmm. We tend to just fall into that, and then we just keep repeating, right? But to allow the strengths of that to provide guardrails for the right side of the brain to just go. Mm-hmm. And 85% of the market is left brain oriented. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you're confronting somebody with a great idea and your boss says, we did that 5 years ago and something like that, and it really didn't work, and I don't think that's a good idea, right? They're not saying it's a bad idea, really. They're just saying, based on, this rigidity, no. But that's just giving you, as a practitioner of innovation, that's just a validation of a death threat. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To be able to quantify your idea, which we can quantify an idea, and then present that quantification. And there's other methodologies, Fermi estimating and so on, because you have to understand that we're engaging with decision makers. There's a decision maker along the value chain of an idea becoming a reality. And those decision makers have to be addressed in the manner that is relevant to their understanding. And most often, it might be a finance person that is heavy left brain or risk avoidance. And you've got to be able to prove the ability of your idea in a quantifiable, systematic manner that reduces a significant amount of that threat. And you should be focusing on prototyping your best practices in a scenario manner that allows you to prove it out before it becomes in place with major investments. That's fail fast, fail cheap. Mm-hmm. And you get these cycles of failure. So you plan for your idea to fail. Mm-hmm. And then what you're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. 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 Then you foresight the value chain of decision makers or situations or the market, or it could be the user, as you develop your idea. We tell students that simply because they got it wrong is only prototyping their thought.
Right.
They have to pivot. The U.S. military looked at our program and said they've never seen anything like it, because they recognize that the theater is shifting and evolving.
Right.
And so these are some of the core dynamics, right, of innovation, which is everything before you get to the business idea or before you develop that business, right? Mm-hmm. It's the skills of thinking. Edward de Bono said, you can't dig a new hole by digging the same one deeper. Right. And so you have to be understanding that failure doesn't mean fail. It means pivot. Mm-hmm. 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 Unless you find a death threat that's just absolute, it's done. You just can't, you're just not going to make it. Okay, fine. Then you didn't invest a ton of money in it and you fail fast, fail cheap, you move on.
Right.
But your objective hasn't changed or the end goal. So you just find, you just work another pathway to get there.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick here, Dave, because and it's not. I know you have time. I have time, but we try to keep the episodes just for the listeners down to sub an hour. So first thing I'm going to say is I knew this was going to. I knew I was going to have to jump in because at some point I'm like, we could just go for hours. So I do want to be conscious of time, kind of wind things down a little bit, but then I want to have you back because I think this conversation is fascinating. But let me put a finer point on a sort of a conclusion type kind of segue, which is, as you looked at innovation, right? And that's a hot topic right now. People are talking about innovation. Hell, we talk about innovation as one of our core themes in the company I launched, right? I mean, a lot of companies are trying to use the term innovation as a central theme, but I'm not sure, based on our discussion and based on your instruction here and insights, that people really understand what innovation truly is.
No, they think it's a marketing terminology. And we have students coming into our class that are answering these challenges as if it's a marketing challenge that they're going to advertise or whatever. And says, no. It's not about marketing.
Mm-hmm.
About the disciplines of your thought.
Mm-hmm.
You develop that. How do you analyze things for what they are? And you know what's interesting, as I mentioned this about the evolution of the marketplace and the workforce, right? All of this that I previously described is occurring, and it's fluid. And yet 5.0 is 4 or 5 years away.
Right.
It's happening now. But you're talking about the metaverse, right? So we have a workforce that has a gap, chain in all aspects, that these new generations are engaging in problems, is engaging in a world that they haven't really got a lot of experience in. And they're going to be addressing problems that they've never experienced before. And they're going to have solutions, this waterfall of solutions that will be inundating the workforce that they've never experienced or had any understanding of, which is going to create new problems and new policies and new activities that are unknown, that is going to create disruption that nobody has experience in. And then it's going to be cyclical. It's a cyclical conundrum. Mm-hmm. And we are not ready for this.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, because this is now we're gonna bleed in, but I'm gonna, because I can't let this one go. But when you say that we're not ready for this, and I'm gonna sort of expand that, because I think system-wide we're looking at humanity, right, and humanity's ability to accept innovation as it comes, right, and as a global group of things that are ever growing and expanding, and you also said it earlier, like 85% remain in a left brain, non-innovative way of thinking, right? Because it's comfortable, it's safe, it's a pattern, it's known, it's not the unknown. I mean, all the things you mentioned. So as you look at this and as you're teaching this and you've seen this, I mean, can anybody really, are they able to become an innovative thinker? Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's a pretty profound question here, but and it can be pretty controversial. But yeah.
We believe, similar to the Innovation Engineering Institute, we believe anybody can be trained to be innovation.
Okay.
Be innovative. Anybody. It's like dribbling a basketball, right? You hand somebody a basketball, they're going to be miserable, but they keep dribbling the basketball, which is what our program does. The brain, eventually, through these systems that they go through over and over and over, becomes comfortable with the strength of the right side blending with the boundaries and the attributes of the left. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to have a more balanced brain, and a balanced brain is 60-40. Yep. 60% left brain, 40% right brain. And once that occurs, the students just zoom right through it. We get these messages like, this has changed my life. I'm thinking differently. I'm coming up with ideas I've never thought of before.
Yeah.
They're just throwing that out there unsolicited. They're saying, I'm going to start a business. And these students, when they graduate, have this portal that's rich in TRIZ, PO, Monte Carlo calculator that projects 5-year sales growth, all these different tools for 2 years. So they graduate just with the mental capacity and the disciplines to deploy it, but they have this toolkit that nobody has, that they engage when they first start working for a company. And they're like 5 years down the road on the first several months of their deploy. This is a very important issue for us, certainly in America, because other countries have figured it out. One. And
okay, so I'm not going to let you go on that one because I have a reaction to that one. I think China. Well, okay, let me re-ask the question because you mentioned China has figured it out. Well, I would suggest that China has a certain mindset. Are they innovative though, or are they really good at taking innovations and then using them to their advantage? Right, like
both probably. I certainly know the latter. But if you look at where they've invested their money in research, Americans, even though we do applied research, the basis and the dominance of our academics is empirical.
Yep.
And then it's kind of reliant upon industry to figure out what to do with it.
Yep.
And where China and other organizations or countries are investing in what's called experiential or applied research, where they're seeing the dynamics of what other people are doing, because it's all footprints, right? And they're up in the web, in the cloud, because one thing academia does really well, they publish. And so they're taking that and applying it in real world scenarios. And as they're doing that, they're also educating a workforce in that applied activity. And if you look at where their money has been invested over the past 5-10 years, it's like, doubling every year for over 10 years in the amount of money they're putting into experiential research. And meanwhile, right, we have the world, but in particular, business. We feel that we have a cause to bring this dynamic, this subject, in a manner to start emboldening the workforce to prepare it. Because as I mentioned, what's going to happen with Industry 5.0, in a conversation I had at a conference with a bunch of technology companies and energy companies, we pointed out this, and then, the retirement age and so on. The conclusion was, and they really freaked out over this. I mean, you could visibly see people move and react to it. Technology companies do what they do best. They create and compete by developing the new greatest thing that does the great dynamic and so on. And they have ways to force distribute that technology, whether the customer wants it or not. Their competition will impose itself on the supply chain and industry. In the course of doing so, they don't have a workforce capable of scaling it beyond its initial introduction. That's serious. There's artificial intelligence at the wellhead, and it's developing so many questions that they don't even have answers for.
Right.
Because they don't even know what questions to ask.
Yep. But therein lies part of the innovators. I'm going to go back to what's-his-face's book, Dilemma, which is a little bit of a riff on his thesis, which is what you just described, which is we get to a point where innovation starts happening. It happens in an even more rapid clip, where now uncertainty is just a daily fact of life, right? And in fact, you are innovating so rapidly that there is no longer, status quo kind of stuff. And that's we can't even, that you want to talk about innovation, people can't even think of a world like that because we've been spending all of our 100,000 years of trying to organize into a more systematic, repeatable process. Well, that's contrary to innovation, which is breaking that down and changing that pattern and changing that process. It's inherently kind of,
exactly. We tend to focus on teaching somebody how to do a job.
Yep.
And they'll teach somebody how to do a job.
Sure.
But you teach somebody the skill sets of innovation, they become mentors to the people around them.
Yep.
You build this perpetual movement inside workforce by this approach.
Yep.
And, otherwise, you become linear, which is I'm going to train all these people to do a job, and they'll do the job. But are they building a culture that is progressive?
Right.
Does it advance itself in unknown ways?
Right.
If you ask Henry Ford, actually Henry Ford said this: if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Right. Right.
Nobody told Steve Jobs to put a camera in a phone.
Totally. Yep. Well, in fact, I'll give you one that I always loved, which is Alexander Graham Bell. When he invented the phonograph and listed the 10 use cases for that phonograph, not one of them was listening to music.
Yeah.
Right. It's a slightly different view of what you're describing, but it's the other side of it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm with you. Hey, Dave, I at this point, because we're bleeding over, so I'm going to put a pause, because I know I would spend the entire day with you. So I'd love to be on a panel with you. This is a hell of a lot of fun, and I'd like to pick back up. But I do. I mean, this is, well, one, what an interesting path to get to where you are. Two, I do want to make a shout out that, you're at the University of Houston, you're leading the practice in the area of innovation. And innovation, at the end of the day, is really, it's embracing it's almost, again, in my words here, a philosophy that we're going to have to really begin to harness as a species moving forward better than we have historically, because it's not just Industry 5.0, Dave, it's human beings are about to make the step into the space, into the universe. I mean, over the next 100 years, you're going to have human little tribes popping up on different planets. And what does that mean for us? How do we think about that? What does that system involve? So it's not just technology, but it's about the whole, this is sci-fi come to life, and innovation is going to be at the forefront. That thinking, what you're teaching at the University of Houston is going to be at the forefront of that. It has to be.
Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, dare I say, the leadership of disruption.
Yes. Which is a whole, trust me, there's a gazillion questions in my head right now, which it's a fascinating other topic, which is, you start thinking about, how you move forward as a species. Well, by definition, you're describing this earlier, not everyone can be an innovator. It doesn't mean everyone is incapable of innovation, but as a species, not everyone can be an innovator, right? They can innovatively think potentially, but can they be on the forefront of innovation? I don't know. That's another part of this puzzle when you start thinking about the system again. It's like, can everyone be an entrepreneur? Probably not. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Right. Like I said, it's just, okay, I'm going to wind up there. I'm going to hit pause. It has been, I feel almost rushed that I have to do this, because this is the longest episode we've ever had. It's a great way to end the year after 2 years. But honestly, this is the first time I've actually gone over by 10 or 15 minutes, and I can't stop. So I'm going to stop there. Awesome conversation. People can find you, just quick highlight, on LinkedIn, at the University of Houston. Where are the other, do you have your own kind of davecrawley.com?
No, I just do what I do. I'm blessed to be doing what I do. Right. I'm at the College of Technology at the University of Houston.
Right.
So you can find me on the faculty. Also, productizing partnerships, commercializing partnerships in technology. LinkedIn is probably one of the best places to find me.
Yep. And perfect.
Dave Crawley, not David Crawley.
Yep. And when we'll put these links in the write up and everything else. But,
okay.
All that stuff's going to be there. We'll make it easy breezy. But again, Dave, honestly, thank you so much. I really, we're going to chat again. And there's a lot to keep going on this one. But great program, great story. Thank you for being on today.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be of service to you and your audience.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Richard Donaldson. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments about the episode or topics in supply chain you'd like us to explore, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at supplychainnext@requis.com. And while you're at it, why not check out the Requis platform at supplychain.requis.com. Requus allows you to manage the full asset lifecycle in the cloud, collaborating with your entire value network to buy, manage, and sell your assets. Find out more at www.requus.com.